You know that feeling you get when you spend even a little time outside? No matter how challenging it is to get out there, spending time in nature is always worth it. I'm your host, Amy Bouchatz, and this is another episode of Humans Outside. Join me as we hear from fascinating outdoor-minded guests and use the Humans Outside 365 challenge of spending time outside every day no matter what to push us outside daily. I've been a journalist for 2 decades, and I love asking questions, but I also love going outside. So why not combine the two? Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go. Hey humans! It's that time of year where so many people have romance and relationships on the mind, or at least the benefits of post-holiday chocolate sales. One of my favorite benefits of spending time outside is how doing so daily has worked to better my relationships, giving me space to grow them in the context of nature. But did you know nature can also help when a relationship ends? That it can literally be a part of healing heartbreak? In this Best of episode, we hear from best-selling author Florence Williams about her up-close and personal study on that topic. It's a really inspiring discussion of how spending time outside can step in when you feel like your world is crashing down. Here's that episode with Florence, complete with its original introduction. Even if a deep part of you that you don't want to address knows that all is not right in a relationship, the truth can still blindside you. Even if you see it coming like a freight train, heartbreak and all of its pain and anguish is never actually expected. And it's always harder to move through than you think it will be, even in your wildest dreams or nightmares. I know that because I've lived through it. For me, it actually physically hurt. I wanted to know how to make the pain stop and when I would feel better again. It is by far the worst, most painful thing that has ever happened to me, and I've been through the ringer. So, what does that have to do with going outside? When we deal with heartbreak, we go hunting for something to ease the pain. If you're someone who likes to head into nature, or if you're searching for something, anything that can help, you might look to heading outside as a way to make it feel better. Today's guest, Florence Williams, has, like me and like so many of you, also experienced heartbreak. Because she's a science journalist who specializes in writing about nature and who loves going outside, she didn't just turn to nature to see if it could help her heal. She did so with the eye of someone who would write about it. And what she found can really help all of us. You might be familiar with her book, The Nature Fix. Today, Florence is going to tell us about her new inspirational memoir, Heartbreak, and all the incredible lessons about healing from heartbreak she experienced through heading outside and using herself as a case study. She's joined us for the podcast before, and I'm so honored that she's chosen to join us again. Florence, welcome back to Humans Outside.
Thank you, Amy. What a lovely introduction, and it's always so nice to be on your show.
Well, thank you so much. So, when we last spoke, we talked about your other book, The Nature Fix. Well, one of your other books, The Nature Fix, and specifically about how heading into nature can improve daily life right where you are. So, today we're going to talk about this specific process of healing from heartbreak with nature. And I just want to say thank you for being willing to share your story.
You're welcome. This book is more personal than my other books for sure. It does feel a little bit exposing. I'm out there.
Yeah, you're out there. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And you've also got an audiobook that is I haven't listened to the audiobook. I have read the book, but I love an immersive audiobook. And so I'm really excited. I'm going to listen to that too because it sounds like it's designed more like a podcast. If listeners have ever listened to Malcolm Gladwell's podcast books, they might be familiar with this style, sort of like that, right?
Yeah, it's what we call an immersive audiobook, and it is a little bit of a hybrid in that while I was reporting the Heartbreak book over several years, I just taped everything.
Yeah.
I taped interviews with the scientists, I taped interviews with my therapist, with my best friends, and we incorporated all that sort of live, in the moment tape as part of the audiobook. So it's really fun.
That's really cool. So if you enjoy listening to podcasts, you might enjoy this audiobook in particular. And I am, like I said, I'm excited to go listen to that because I love me an immersive audiobook. I listen to them while I'm running. It's yeah, love it. So we like to scene set in Humans Outside by envisioning ourselves chatting with our guests in their favorite outdoor space. Now, we've talked to you before in your, in quote unquote, your favorite outdoor space. Last time we imagine hanging out with you by the Potomac River in the DC area. Is that where we should metaphorically go again?
I think in honor of Heartbreak, let's go to a wide sandy beach along the Green River through Canyonlands National Park.
Awesome.
So that is a major scene in the book, and I call it the Naked Yoga Beach because I pulled over and did some of that on this beach while I was by myself, and it's a beautiful spot with uh, tall red canyon walls, and you can hear ravens cackling overhead, and hear this sort of stream riffling by, and it's just a really lovely spot.
Love it. And yeah, that's I, and it's hot, really hot, which makes
Really,
the
really hot.
naked yoga very appropriate.
But the water is perfect for a swim.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine sitting here in the dead of winter ever being hot again, but we'll take your word for it that it
Trust me.
happens. So, like we mentioned just a moment ago, this is a very personal book, and I actually feel kind of rotten asking for you to tell us about your heartbreak.
Well,
It's just a wound that's so personal, like, it's something I wanna protect in my own life,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it's par for the course, though. I'm putting it out there for the benefit of my readers.
Yeah.
So, I'm willing to share it, and, yeah, I mean, so what happened was, in the year I turned 50, uh, my husband of 25 years, um, sort of decided that he really didn't wanna be married to me anymore.
Mm.
And, I mean, there were various things leading up to that. Yeah, there probably were signs that I could have paid more attention to, ways in which we weren't as connected as we sometimes had been. Um, and I actually found an email from him. Well, I wasn't snooping, just in my own defense. He handed me his phone one day to look for something else, and I saw an email that he'd written to another woman.
Yeah, boy, is that relatable.
I know. I mean, it's really hard, I think, to keep a secret these days in the internet. But yeah, I mean, my stomach sort of fell through my body, in that moment, and didn't come back into place, I think, for a really long time. But that's kind of the moment where where the marriage really started dissolving, in a sort of permanent way.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I said in the introduction, you can see the signs. Hindsight's 2020. I mean, it
Right.
always is, right? So maybe you can't, maybe you can, but later you think you could, because that's how life works. You think you could have seen something that, in the past. So, um, you know, I so you have your marriage dissolving, it takes two to tango, but that's really the moment,
Right.
where it starts going. And then you set out on this need to heal from heartbreak, which is not an easy thing. And like I mentioned, I really wanted to know. Well, first of all, let me just say, if people want to hear about my own heartbreak, you're actually the only person I've ever done an interview with about it before.
And
Um,
grateful to you for that.
and I've done it, and so I've never really talked about that on the podcast here. The interview with you is with my husband and I. So spoiler alert, that's how the story ends, right? Still married, and as you all know, and we moved to Alaska to help us heal from that. But if listeners want to hear about specifically what happened, they can listen to the Outside Magazine podcast episode with you, and they can just go hunting from that. I'll put a link in the show notes. So I don't want to like make these veiled like references to this thing without
Yep, your
giving people
story's
more
out there. Your story's
information.
out there. It's a beautiful story, about healing in nature, and really grateful to you for doing that with
Well,
me.
and thank you for being awesome and somebody I could trust with that because that was really important to me as well. But so we used nature to heal from heartbreak, but I didn't study it from a scientific way at all in that moment, and you did. So tell us what methods of heartbreak, or healing heartbreak rather, that you explored and then ended up putting in this book.
Yeah, I think I should maybe just preface it by saying I felt this incredible urgency
Mm.
to throw everything I could at getting better.
Yeah, also
And
relatable.
yeah, yeah, but I had never experienced heartbreak before. I had met the man who would be my husband when I was 18. So I've been sort of, I think sheltered,
Yeah.
sheltered from heartbreak. And I think whenever, whatever age you are, it can hit in similar ways.
Mhm.
But For me, uh, I really registered the pain in my body in ways that surprised me and baffled me and scared me
Mm,
because I started to get sick. So that's definitely one of the themes of this book. That there are these big connections between our emotions and our bodies, and that we need to pay attention to them, and we need to take heartbreak and grief and loneliness, these difficult emotions, we need to take them really seriously. And in fact, our bodies, our brains are putting out these emotions for a purpose. And it's so that we do pay attention to them, and we try to get better. So for me, I immediately stopped being able to sleep, which, over months really feels terrible. I lost 20 pounds that I didn't want to lose. I felt really agitated and like nervous, in this way that I wasn't used to feeling. It felt terrible. I think in the book I describe it as feeling like I was plugged into a faulty electrical socket.
mhm.
um, I almost felt like my hair was kind of like, stuck on end, and
Yeah,
my every cell in my body was kind of stuck on end.
also relatable.
Yeah. I actually got diagnosed after some months. I got diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and at one point, I talked to, well, I talked to a bunch of people. I talked to neuroscientists. I talked to psychologists. I talked to a really fascinating immunogeneticist who said to me, your white blood cells are probably freaking out right
Mm,
now because you feel abandoned, you feel alone. And, as human animals, like we are not really supposed to be moving through the world feeling like we're alone. It makes us feel unsafe, we find safety in groups. And when we lose a primary attachment partner like that, we feel very exposed. And our bodies respond in the same way that they would if we were alone in the jungle, about to
mm.
be attacked by a predator. So our bodies put out more inflammation, which we know is linked to all sorts of, chronic diseases, including the one I was diagnosed with, which is type 1 diabetes, usually diagnosed in children, but I got diagnosed after the split.
Mhm.
And so you're right. So I was like, okay, I need to do everything I can to get better. And I did that in the ways I knew how, which was looking to nature. And also in a bunch of ways I didn't know how, but ways that had some science behind them, and different kinds of interventions and therapy modalities and stuff like that. But I think for this episode, you probably want to talk about mostly the nature piece.
Yes. But, I think it's worth saying that, um well, I'm not a doctor. Let's start there. So I would never say, going outside is the only cure for you. And that often with anything we're facing in life, it's a variety of solutions, right? Combined with seeing an
Right.
actual doctor, combined with getting healthy, combined with spending more time in nature, and that all of those things are true, even though we are going to focus on the outside one today.
Right. So, I had written this book, The Nature Fix, which is subtitled How Being in Nature Can Make You Happier, Healthier, and More Creative. So I felt like I had some tools and I wanted to go back to that book, as if my life depended on it. But in that book, I only talk about sort of immersions in nature from, nearby nature on your block, going outside for 15 minutes,
Right.
to spending 3 days outside or in the wilderness. And then for this book, I was like, I think I need more than 3 days. Like, this is such a big kind of emotional trauma, really, that I want to find out, how we can be helped if we spend more time outside,
Mm.
or whether we can either be helped by more time outside. And so I planned a really dramatic, sort of big expedition, um, as part of this process for me. So I planned a 30-day river trip down the Green River, which starts in really southwestern Wyoming and then flows all the way through most of Utah until it meets with the Colorado River, south of Canyonlands National Park.
And river floating, river running, floating, this water stuff like that is really, something you have a strong background in, something that's really like a touchstone for you to, your when you were young and things like that, right? Like this isn't just like out of left field. I think I'll try a river.
Right. Yeah, that's right. So I grew up canoeing, wilderness rivers with my dad.
Right.
And then, my ex-husband was also, a big river runner, and it was something we did with our kids all the time, something we did together. And I felt like it was really important for me to sort of reclaim this
Mm,
experience as my own. This is something that's part of my core identity, not just sort of my marital identity. And of
right.
course, when you're going through a divorce like this, it's all about accessing your core identity, rebuilding your identity because you feel like it's been really torn apart, for many reasons. Um, and so turning to the wilderness and turning to river running specifically, for me was kind of a way to try to hit a lot of those markers. But another big piece of my river trip was that I did half of it with friends and family,
Mm,
and then I did half of it solo. And I think, the successes in there were sort of a mixed bag with the solo piece, and we can talk about that. But I felt like the metaphor of paddling my own boat
mm,
was really, really important to sort of my sort of recovery self-concept. I've been with my husband since I was 18. So I needed to learn how to be alone. I needed to learn how to be self-reliant and take care of myself. um, I wanted to be able to tell myself a new story in which I could be, the agent of the future.
mm.
I literally needed to pilot my own boat now. And so the metaphors of the river trip were really kind of irresistible to me.
Yeah. Yeah, because you and I are storytellers and we have a flair. We cannot resist, this idea of leaning into a metaphor or, what might make a good story, which of course is why you recorded all of this as you went.
Well, and I think really all of us are storytellers.
Mm,
It's our egos are constructed that way, to put
mhm,
ourselves front and center. And we tell ourselves stories all the time, um, and about how we make sense of our lives and
mm.
how we make sense of chaos and how we make sense of pain. Um, so I think it's a natural instinct, not just a writerly one.
Yeah, fair enough. Um, so, on your journey, you spent a lot of time outside, not just wandering around hoping it would help and observing how you reacted and leaning into the metaphor that we just talked about. Uh, but you've worked with top level scientists to measure that health through blood work. You really tracked how this was going. So tell us what were you tracking? And what did you find through your work tracking that? And I want to say, as somebody who loves to track things, what the kind of tracking you were doing is not like I wear my Apple Watch and press the button every time I do anything trackable. Like it was sort of way beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to find the sort of cutting edge science. And so that required me reaching out to scientists, who are sort of pioneering this field of um, the ways in which our bodies, specifically our immune systems, register social pain.
Mm,
So one of the sort of leading figures in this field is a guy named Stephen Cole at UCLA. He's a neurogeneticist, and he started out by looking at the blood cells, white blood cells, of men with HIV. This was back in the 90s.
mhm,
Some of them were in the closet, some of them were out of the closet, some of them had social support, some of them did not. And what he found is that the men without social support, who felt like they were really alone in facing, this terrible illness, were the ones who progressed to full-blown disease faster.
mhm,
They made fewer T cells. Their immune systems responded in exactly the wrong way, actually. And then he started looking at healthy people who, nevertheless, considered themselves lonely. And there's a large database of people in Chicago. Researchers have been looking at for decades, actually, and following for decades. And by looking at their blood, he was able to determine that there's actually a suite of cells, a suite of genes, transcription factors that turn our genes off and on in our immune systems in ways that make us more likely to produce a lot of inflammation, and less likely to fight viruses. So that's the wrong response for HIV. It's the
Right.
wrong response for a pandemic. Um, and it's the wrong response for chronic illnesses like diabetes, like cardiac disease, like dementia and Alzheimer's.
Mm.
A lot of the chronic diseases in modern life are actually really driven by inflammation. And the reason we're so inflamed is because our bodies release a lot of stress hormones, and they keep releasing them if we still feel like we are in a threat state. So our bodies don't really make the distinction between, oh, yeah, you're getting divorced, and oh, yeah, you're literally lying in the middle of the jungle
Yeah.
and hyenas are circling you.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's the wrong metaphor, but you're lying in the middle of the veldt or the savannah. There you go. You're lying in the middle of the savannah. And the hyenas are circling you, or you're about to get injured because you're alone. And so putting out inflammation in your blood is like maybe a good response, if you're in the
Mhm.
jungle, about to be attacked. But it's not a good response in modern life,
Right.
especially if it, continues for years.
Mm. This is why people who okay, people, I mean me. Other I'm always so surprised when I do some sort of big long-term physical challenge that my body doesn't react the way I think it should. I think
Mhm.
my body should say, "Whoa, you are so awesome."
Right.
But my body says, "Something terrible is happening here, and we have to save all of the stores you have eaten for the last 4 months just in case you're about to die." So
Right. Right.
and that's I mean, that I'm still trying to recover from this 100-mile thing I did this summer
Wow.
because of that. Like, I really messed up my inflammation response by
Mhm,
training so
mhm.
hard, and, now I'm still paying the price for that, and I'm not sad that I did that, but I'd rather not pay the price, and I just always forget that bodies don't know the difference between the hyenas and the ultra marathon. They just don't.
Yeah, that's interesting, and we know that people who do sort of exercise heavily, do for a short time, pulse out more inflammation. That's true, and it may not be a bad thing. I mean, it's probably good for our bodies to practice, you know, pulsing out, inflammation. Yes, there's stress here, but then recovering from it,
Right.
right? So as long as you're sort of recovering, then the stress actually can be really adaptive and helpful, and your body's working really well. But if you do something super extreme, like a 100-mile race, it may not be such a quick return to baseline.
So, break it down for us. Can you heal from heartbreak by going outside? And if so, how?
Right. Great question. Um, so I think I feel like I have a three-part heartbreak cure. And I'll just say what the three parts are and then we can sort of go into
Cool.
it. But I think that nature actually does potentially help with all three pieces. It can, but it also isn't really the whole magic bullet. So the first piece is you have to calm down or else healing is just not going to happen, right?
Goes
So
back
if
to
you're
that inflammation thing we were just talking about.
and if you're in a fight or flight state, you're just not going to be able to benefit, from
Sure.
the healing that needs to happen. So that first piece is calm. The second piece is connection, and the third piece is sort of purpose or meaning.
Mm.
And I think particularly for those first two pieces, nature can be really, really critical. And I, I mean, I was prone to like that, kind of solution, but it was really hammered home for me when I visited a psychologist at the University of Utah named Paula Williams. And Paula Williams said to me, "Yeah, we know that the health outcomes for people who get divorced are really bad.
Mm.
You have a 23% increased risk of early death, first
Great.
of all. You are at greater risk of heart disease, greater risk of, again, feeling lonely, which is
Mm.
linked to all these other things, greater risk for depression. It goes on and on. And it's grim. In fact, we think divorced people have worse health outcomes than widows and widowers. And they also have worse health outcomes than people who never married, who are just single and, happy to be single.
Well, that's fantastic.
So But she said to me, but these are based on large population
Mm,
studies. These are just trends in the general population. She said, we know that some individuals are able to really be resilient in the face of heartbreak and they can get over it really well and their bodies can return to normal. And I was like, please tell me, who are those people and what are their traits and how do I become one?
right.
And what she said was super interesting. It really surprised me. She said, when we look at the science of who does well, one of the traits that really stands out is this personality trait of openness. People who are curious, people who are able to find beauty and sort of thrive in beauty, people who are prone to feeling awe, the emotion of awe. And she's really drilled down on different qualities in her lab, and it's really this ability to feel awe and beauty that's kind of like the main thing that helps people recover, and that just knocked my socks off. And I was like, "Wow, okay, I like nature, I can find awe and beauty there." For someone else, it might be, hearing music or,
Mm,
going to a cathedral, whatever makes you feel, this kind of sense of awe. And interestingly, when you feel that kind of beauty, it does calm you down in some interesting, unexpected ways, but it also makes you feel connected. So that's that second piece, the connection. Makes you feel connected to the world around you. Imagine like, lying in a field looking up at the Milky Way. Suddenly you feel like a small little grain of sand in the universe.
mhm,
You feel like your ego, your problems, they're just, maybe they're not quite as big a deal as you thought they were. You get sort of humbled in this really beneficial way to your health. And then interestingly, when you feel connected to the world around you, the science shows that we also tend to feel more connected to other people.
mhm, mhm.
So, especially if we're sharing that moment, but just in general, we may feel less ego driven and more community minded, which is really interesting and really healthy. So nature can obviously provide that sort of connection piece. Um, and give us perspective. It's just basic perspective giving. Like literally, we feel smaller. And we know this from the science, where researchers will take a group of people to look at, for example, Yosemite,
Mhm.
Half Dome in Yosemite, and they'll gaze up at this incredible, majestic landscape. And then the researchers ask them to draw a picture of themselves in the landscape. And then they do the same thing while people are just looking at an urban setting like Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco, which is just a name, kind of a pleasant streetscape. And then they ask them to draw themselves. And the people who are looking at Yosemite literally draw their figures as 30% smaller than the
Mm,
people who are looking at Fisherman's Wharf. So, this perspective taking, it's like literal. Like you literally feel less significant. And it's not a self-esteem kind of problem. Oh, I'm nothing. It's
right.
actually that everything else feels really significant and beautiful and wonderful.
It's context.
It's context, but it's just really healthy. It's like, yeah, I'm not that much more significant or important than everything else in the world. Like, we're all sort of in it together.
Yeah. So, okay, so it's easy to see how you could find that context standing under Half Dome or looking at the Grand Canyon. Is it possible to find that context while being in your backyard?
Yeah, absolutely. So, awe doesn't have to be Yosemite. It doesn't have to be the Grand Canyon. We can find moments of awe, and this is something I have really worked on, in cities. We can find them in our backyards. You can always look up and see the sky and really pay attention to it. You can see the moon, you can see the colors changing on the leaves. You can see, animals and birds wherever you are. Um, or it can be like from a house plant, even if you really attend to it and watch it change and bloom. It can be from playing with your children. How many times do we feel sort of awed by our children and sort of
Mhm.
that they come out with these surprising, sort of brilliant things to say or do or be? We feel awe all the time, I think, in the context of our social lives
Yeah,
too. But it's what's important is to not let those moments just pass us by
right.
or not to be looking at our, social media instead of actually attending, to the blooms on our amaryllis or whatever.
Right.
And so it's a cultivated practice, sort of like meditation, learning to sit with these moments of awe and
Hmm.
learning to look for them. And there are
Yeah.
studies showing that when people do this, it actually is really, really good for their well-being.
So it's a practice of being intentional and taking the time to step back from the other things occupying your brain space. Social media is the one we like to rag on, but it could be work, it could be anything. It
Yeah,
could be my grocery list. In fact, it often is,
exactly.
right?
Exactly.
My tasks or whatever. And then just being not to sound too frou-frou, but in that moment and noticing what's around you. I think back to one of the I think it was the first year I was doing my outside time, my 20 minutes a day, and I was walking through the woods outside behind my house in the wintertime, and I got, my watch ticked, like, I had a text message, pick up my phone, start to respond to this text message, and look up just in time to see I'm about to walk. I mean, I was maybe 20 feet from a mama moose and her kid,
Oh,
her
wow.
baby moose, right? Like, this is not they weren't looking threatened. They weren't being threatening, but getting close to a moose and her baby is not recommended. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, that
So
is a surprising moment
it's
of
a surprising
exit
moment.
for
And
sure.
it okay, so let's say I hadn't been looking at my phone while I was walking through the woods, which I now try not to because of this experience, but, um I would have not only not put myself in a precarious position with this moose, I would have seen her in soon enough to stop and just watch. Like, I could have stood
Mhm.
there and experienced looking at this, amazing, humongous animal and her baby and them eating and just really enjoyed that without disturbing them and without putting myself into this heightened talk about panic, right? Now
Right.
now my outside time is turned into an adrenaline rush because we almost had a moose encounter. Um, that's a really dramatic example. And most people listening to this probably aren't going to accidentally walk into a moose.
No.
But there are lots of situations where you're outside and you're not noticing the things that you could be, because you are distracted by whatever else is going on. Um,
That's right.
yeah, and I mean, it's a thing. It's a thing in modern life. I'm sure it was a thing in before modern life. People have had grocery lists forever. So,
But they definitely, I think, in pre-modern life had more opportunities for
right,
awe, for
exactly.
sure. I mean, there were a lot of stresses in in daily life, but there were also these sort of built-in stress recovery experiences, because at the end of the day, you would, sit around the fire and look at the fire and sing and tell stories and, look at the Milky Way and watch the sunset every single night. When you're living in the cycles of nature, a lot of it is sort of built in. And for us now, we have to make a huge effort. As you say, it's kind of an intentional
Yeah.
mindfulness practice. But I do have a kind of little tip for how to access that.
Please
Um,
share it.
I was actually part of a study that looked at, I think it was called the North Bay Awe Study, um, that asked us participants to practice something they called the acronym of awe. So
Okay.
AWE. And the A is, go for a walk or, sit with your houseplant or whatever, and just pay attention. So the A is attention.
Mm.
And then the W is wait. So, you know, really be present with that beautiful thing that you are tasting or touching or experiencing or looking at. And then the E is for exhale. So just, sit with that beautiful thing for 2 or 3 breaths. That's it. Do that a couple times a day. And the researchers for this study did find, in fact, that it was like, significantly linked to improvements in well-being, which is hard to believe that, like, just 3 breaths of looking at something pretty can make you feel better about yourself, better about your work, better about your family. It was incredible.
Yeah, it's funny because I did a interview for the podcast. People could have listened to it in I think in December with a expert, Dr. Michael Turman, who studies light therapy for dealing with
Oh,
seasonal affective disorder.
yeah.
he was like, he basically said, "This is so simple, it's crazy that people don't do this." You purchase a box light, of a certain, um, strength and a certain position, for example, having one slightly above your head, versus straight in front of your face, because slightly above your head mimics natural sunrise and straight in front of your face is just staring at the light. Um and you use this for, 15 minutes in the morning, at the time that your body would naturally be waking up, and it has, like, marked, measurable improvements for feelings of depression, whether that's actual sad in the wintertime or just feeling sad. Um, uh, and it's crazy that people don't do this, and I'm sitting
Yeah.
here like, "I should do that." I still haven't done it. Still haven't
Well,
done it.
but you might do it sort of like I do it, which well, although you live in a dark place right now, but I go for walks early in the morning,
Right,
almost every morning. So I am doing a version of light therapy, but I'm just doing it outside. And not only does it, I think it help with mood, but there are studies showing that, when your circadian rhythm is kind of where it's supposed to
right.
be, it has cascading effects on all kinds of biological processes in your body,
Yeah, yeah, so
hormone release, all that stuff. Really
absolutely. So
important.
it's just one of those things that's, like, so simple that you're like, "That's crazy, that can't possibly help, I'll take a million vitamins," like,
Right.
we have this propensity, I think, to make
Just
things
give
more
me a pill.
complicated. Right. Well, give me a pill, but also just to make things more complicated than they have to be.
Yeah,
Um
just walking going for a 15-minute walk in the morning is hugely helpful, and that was definitely part of my heartbreak recovery too. It
Mm,
wasn't just the wilderness, it was like I actually live in the heart of a city in
mhm.
Washington, DC, so I have to figure out, how to do it on a almost daily basis where I
Right.
am.
Right. So we've talked about awe. We just talked about your daily morning walk. Um, Anyone who has ever experienced heartbreak, like we've been talking about today, knows that desperation to make it feel better. I think that's
Mhm.
you and I talked about how we really just wanted to fix it as soon as possible. I think that's I have to believe that that's a common a common feeling. Um, so
Yeah, and it's just unfortunately, it's just not
Right.
that easy.
It's not that easy. Right. In fact, I remember right after my, sort of you have, like you mentioned earlier, this one event that triggers this cascade of heartbreak. And I remember being on the phone with somebody who'd also had a similar experience. And specifically asking her, okay, so on which date will this stop hurting as much?
Exactly.
Like, can I mark
Exactly.
my calendar for when this is going to stop being so incredibly painful? And
And
she's
I was so determined that it would just be like 1 year, that's it. I'm
right.
gonna give it 1 year and then I'm gonna be done.
Yeah, exactly. Like, surely there's like a common experience,
12
how long
months.
this lasts? Um, Not only is there not a common experience to how long this lasts, but you don't necessarily realize the day that happens. You
Yeah, and there may not be a sort of gatepost
right.
marking the land of being totally better.
Yeah.
We expect this kind of neat resolution or neat closure to our heartbreak. And unfortunately, or fortunately, in some ways, um, our emotions are just more layered and really interesting actually than that. And living with some scars, living with some memories, living with, some moments of regret, these things are going to keep popping up. That's not necessarily a terrible thing.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're human. It reminds us that we have, in some ways, frailties that can be turned to strengths if we learn how to kind of open our hearts
Mhm.
instead of just numbing out.
Yeah. And, as we've been talking about today, that, acronym of awe that you just mentioned a little earlier, and using nature to make yourself feel better from the heartbreak can also be tools that you have now in your pocket, something you've learned to deal with, a wide variety of challenges from life.
Exactly.
Life is full of that, and isn't it nice to have to know the tools to take care of it?
Exactly. Exactly. But having said that, at the time I was like, I really want this river trip to heal me.
Right. Right.
I'm gonna end this river trip and I'm gonna be all better. It was a year after the split. Um, and honestly, it didn't quite work out that way.
Mm, mm. Okay, so it didn't work out that way, but what happens next? So what's the end of that story?
Well, so, my intentions for the river trip were to access bravery because I was so afraid of my
Mm.
future. It was to learn how to be alone and learn to be self-reliant, and also to sort of tell myself a new story about who I was going to be on the other side.
Mm.
So again, to sort of continue that metaphor, like I was leaving the sort of badlands of the broken badlands of my marriage and flowing to this new place that I hoped would be sort of light filled and wonderful. And that I would emerge as this sort of heroine ready to take on the rest of her life and also to calm down, right? So we did a blood sample before the river trip, and we did another blood sample after the river trip. And what was so disappointing is that my blood really didn't look any better after being in the wilderness. I did feel like I had achieved some of my goals, like I did feel more self confident. I felt a little bit less afraid. I felt um, I felt like I had a lot of time to reflect, and that was somewhat helpful, although I could also go down these kind of negative rabbit holes of emotion, and there was no one to kind of, pull me out of it because my best girlfriends weren't there to say, "Florence, you're being an idiot," you know? And and then the other piece, is that I was alone. So that is good for a lot of things. It's good for self-confidence maybe, but it's not so good for calming down your nervous system
Mhm.
because we're not really supposed to be alone in the wilderness, right? It's
Right.
like we don't feel totally safe when we're alone. We have to always be a little bit on edge. We have to be hyper aware of our surroundings. When you're in the wilderness without a road, without another person, without a phone, you can't screw up. I couldn't like cut myself or light the beach on fire by mistake or, tie my boat in badly and have it flow down the river without me. So I had to just be like on alert all the time. And that's important and you'll survive that way, but it's not really going to make you feel calm,
Right.
relaxed. It's going to make you feel like, "Oh my, okay, I'm out here alone. I'm going to survive. I'm going to get through this." And so that was reflected in my immune system, which was still pumping out a fair amount of norepinephrine and affecting my immune system. So when I talked to, the neurogeneticist after this, he was like, well, really, there are other things that you could be doing to calm down. Like, don't be alone. Don't be
Right.
alone outside. Be outside with your friends if you're feeling, afraid. And then he said, also, we know what's really, really helpful for improving people's immune systems is this third piece of the heartbreak solution, which is the purpose and the meaning. Like, go do stuff that makes you feel like you're helpful to other people. Do stuff where you feel connected. Tell yourself a story where you're learning something from this that you can take into the
Mm.
future to help other people. So he said, when we do that with these populations that we study, it's the people who don't necessarily report that they are happy and mirthful and cheerful or that they're even like particularly social. It's the people who have meaning and purpose in their lives. Those are the ones who have the best immune systems. So I thought that
Mm.
was really fascinating and kind of unexpected.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Well, we have come to the end of our time with you, which is sad because I think we could talk about this with you all day. It's such a broad and important topic. I just want to say, first of all, thank you for your transparency and for writing about this because even though that's kind of who you are as a person, it's who I am as a person, that's an act of bravery, being willing to put yourself out there and for the good of the order as it were.
Yes.
So thank you
Thank
for
you,
having that
Amy.
bravery.
Thank you for saying that, and thank you for having me on, and for sharing my story with your listeners. I'm really privileged and pleased to do it.
That's a wrap on this episode of Humans Outside. But hey, I need your help. Enjoy this show? Leave a 5-star rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. It makes me feel good, but it also helps others find the show too, which is cool, right? Now, go get outside. Until next time, we'll see you out there.